Hi, and welcome to this masking demo. This demonstration is going to cover a few basic tips on using masking tape to create hard-edge shapes. While this is not a comprehensive look at how masking tape can be used in a painting, it will give you the basic idea. To get started with, what I really need to do is paint a ground on this canvas. So with my paint tray here, I'm going to just add some colors. I like to use a dirty mixture where there's a lot of white to make it lighter, a little grayer. For this, I'm also going to use some Payne's gray and some turquoise green. And this is just going to give me a cool neutral background that's relatively opaque on which I can paint over the top of. Make sure that you mix your ground paint pretty thoroughly. It doesn't matter if there's a little bit of streak in it, depending on what you're going after, but you definitely want to have some control. So when I paint my ground, what I really want to do is make sure I paint the entire surface. I don't want any of that white canvas left. I'm going to get a liberal amount of paint on the surface, and then I'm going to just kind of go in perpendicular directions. You can see here I'm making sure to go vertical and horizontal. And then it needs to completely dry. So I use a blow dryer. If you don't have a blow dryer, you can just wait. With acrylic paint, that's just going to depend on the kind of day you're having, how dry it is outside. So this, with a blow dryer, probably only took about 5 or 6 minutes to get it to be dry enough to work with, but make sure it is totally dry. When you're done with the blow dryer, make sure you run your hand across it. Okay, so this is totally dry, and I'm going to use my 1.5 inch masking tape and my acrylic matte medium. The matte medium is not, strictly speaking, required, but is an option that I like to go with. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my masking tape to draw a shape. In this case, I'm just going to use the straight edge of the masking tape. So this is speeding up here. Just making a random geometric shape, kind of triangular in nature. And I'm burnishing that down. What that means is I'm using my finger to press down the edge of the tape. And now I'm just going to fill the whole shape with that matte medium. Make sure that you're nice and even with your matte medium and that you get it completely dry. So I'm using the blow dryer again here and making sure with my finger that it's completely dry all the way around. Now I'm going to go ahead and put some paint. This doesn't really matter what you put in there. I'm using white again to make sure it's a one coat opaque application. And I just wanted to pick a color that's going to contrast with the background for the sake of the demonstration. I'm putting a base coat on here and then putting a little bit of a contrasty dark streak in it. This is more or less an effect. I'll be covering textural effects in the later video. When pulling your tape, make sure that you're pulling your tape in the direction of the line. Don't rip it off quickly like a band-aid. This is in real time right here. And you can see that I'm sort of carefully pulling it in the direction of the line. And you get a nice mechanical edge. This is not something you're going to be able to get just with a straight use of a brush. Okay, for the next technique, what I want to do now is use something that is called field masking. This is where we're going to lay out a large field of masking tape, draw on that field, and then cut away the shape that we want. This is something that you're going to want to use for more complex shapes, things with curves on it, things with a ton of detail. The previous technique is really good if you're making a quick geometric shape, especially something with a straight edge. So you can see here that I'm overlapping the tape just a little bit. Not too much because that's a waste of tape, but you want to overlap it probably a good 1/8 of an inch so that there's plenty of overlap and less likely to leak. You can use a pencil or a pen, it doesn't really matter. The one thing you want to be careful with a pen is make sure that the ink is dry when you cut this, otherwise you can actually drag ink onto your surface. So I'm just making a quick little letter C here, something nice and curvy. And now I'm going to use the X-Acto knife to cut this away. A few notes about using an X-Acto knife. If you are going to use an X-Acto knife with a dull blade, you're going to find this is very difficult to do. It's also not really safe to use a dull blade. So make sure you use a nice, clean, sharp blade and make sure that you change your blade as you need to. You're going to get a good sense of whether or not you're cutting through the tape simply by feel. Now there's no real substitute for experience here, so just do your best and kind of prepare yourself for doing this a few times before you get any sense of mastery with it. You can see here I'm also rotating the canvas to make sure that my direction of cut is comfortable and safe. Now I'm going to peel away the negative space of the tape, and I'm going to burnish that down again with my finger, making sure that there's no little gaps for the paint to sneak through. And then I'm going to apply yet another coat of the matte medium. Sometimes students will ask me, do you have to use the matte medium? Strictly speaking, no. If your paint isn't too wet and you put the paint on carefully, you can get it to work. However, I have found that with the field technique, where there's a lot of overlaps and there's lots of little moments for the tape to lift up and let the paint under, this is more foolproof essentially. This is going to give you a much cleaner look. So I'm going to use the blow dryer again. And you might be tempted to use something like a heat gun. I don't recommend a heat gun. That's way too hot. Sometimes even I'll use the cool setting on a blow dryer to make sure that I'm not getting any kind of tack lift. If you use too much heat, you can actually cause the glue on the tape to stick to the surface of the canvas, and it'll make a tacky surface. For this paint, I'm just going to kind of drag some heavy bodied paint and scrape it across just for an effect. Again, demonstrating that this is a technique that cannot be done simply with paint on a brush. This is more of a masking, frisket technique. Some people call it stenciling, although I think of stenciling as being slightly different. This technique here is something that's a lot of fun to play with, though I would say maybe use it sparingly. Too much of this is not necessarily a good thing. I'm using a tongue depressor to scrape it. You could use whatever. Now I'm going to pull the tape quickly on this, not quickly as in ripping the tape off, but I don't want the paint to start to set up. The thicker the paint, the easier it is to pull the tape when it's wet. The thinner the paint, the easier it is to pull the tape when it's dry. You'll get a good sense of which one you prefer with experience and time. I'm trying to be really cautious here not to get any of the goopy paint dragged onto the clean canvas. But I did it. All right, there it is. It's not much to look at, but it's something.